Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to do something incredibly ambitious. We are distilling over 2,000 years of dense Roman history down to its absolute core. We're tracking one crucial through line: who actually holds the power? We'll trace this all the way from a really messy mythical kingdom right down to its chaotic collapse.
So let's just dive right into our roadmap for this journey. We've got the messy mythical kingdom, the Republic's villain arc, Caesar to Emperor Augustus, the Golden Age, and finally, the long, chaotic collapse.
All right, part one, the messy mythical kingdom, from wolves to walls. Let's get into it.
To really grasp the sheer scale of the history we're covering today, we have to start all the way back in the 8th century BC. We're talking 771 BC, with a frankly bizarre founding myth involving a Vestal virgin, the war god Mars, and twin baby boys, Romulus and Remus, who were literally raised by a female wolf on protein-rich milk. From there, we track the founding of the city, the birth of the Republic, the rise of the empire, all the way to the fall of Western Rome in 476 AD.
But let's rewind to those twin brothers for a second, because the actual founding of Rome essentially boiled down to a super petty sibling argument over which hill to build their new city on. Romulus decides to build this tiny, unimpressive wall. Remus, just totally mocking him, hops right over it and shouts, "Oh no, look, I'm in your super secure city, brother. What will you do, arrest me?" And, well, this petty argument ended with Romulus just murdering his brother Remus right there on the spot. Now, with his new city built, Romulus needed people, so he designated it an asylum city, meaning he literally accepted anyone on the run. We're talking runaway slaves, debt dodgers, guys who stole goats, you name it. But as you might guess, this created a massive demographic problem. They had a huge gender imbalance with basically zero women. Their solution, they threw a massive festival, invited their neighbors, the Sabines, and then awkwardly just kidnapped their women mid-party. Remarkably, this wild strategy actually led to the two groups merging into a single people.
Which brings us to part two, the Republic's villain arc, never be humiliated again.
So after cycling through 7 kings, and the last one was incredibly sinister, by the way, the Romans were done. They expelled the monarchy and birthed the Republic. The crucial point here is that they designed a completely new system to balance power and prevent another tyrant from ever taking over. They shifted from one absolute king to 2 elected consuls who ruled simultaneously and, importantly, could veto each other. It sounded great on paper, but shortly after, the Gauls invaded, sacked Rome, and forced them to pay a massive ransom. Thoroughly humiliated, Rome developed this ultra-militaristic attitude. It was a veritable villain arc where they basically vowed to conquer everything around them before they could ever be conquered again.
And that relentless expansion, it brought them face to face with Carthage. Which brings us to a very specific number, 37. That is the exact number of elephants the Carthaginian general Hannibal famously marched over the freezing Alps to wreck Rome during the Punic Wars. I mean, he made Rome sweat for years. But this massive conflict ultimately ended with Rome bouncing back, completely deleting Carthage from history, enslaving its people, and then proceeding to conquer a staggering 10% of humanity.
Okay, part three. Caesar to Emperor Augustus, the death of the Republic.
This is the major turning point of our explainer. Enter Julius Caesar, a wildly successful and incredibly popular general who ended up dismantling the Republic from the inside out. Now, Caesar wasn't purely evil. He lowered taxes, fixed the calendar, fed the poor. The common people actually loved him for it. But he started absorbing every political office he possibly could, which completely terrified the Roman elite. He was literally collecting titles like dictator, consul, and head priest as if they were Pokemon cards.
This triggered massive paranoia. The Senate was terrified of returning to a monarchy, basically thinking, oh God, he's becoming a king. So to save the Republic, they stabbed Caesar 23 times right in the middle of a Senate meeting. But talk about spectacularly backfiring, because like we said, the common people loved him. This assassination just threw Rome into another massive, bloody civil war. In the power vacuum that followed, 2 main guys stepped up. First, you have Mark Antony. He's relying heavily on Caesar's legacy, but ultimately falls for Cleopatra, moves to Egypt, and essentially simps for her. On the flip side, you have Octavius. He is Caesar's cunning, 18-year-old adopted heir, and Octavius totally outmaneuvered Antony. He turned the city of Rome against him, defeated him, changed his own name to Augustus, and officially spawned the Roman Empire in 27 BC.
Moving right along to part 4, the Golden Age, stabilizing the machine. You know, Augustus was perhaps the greatest emperor because he realized something crucial. Endless expansion was totally unsustainable. Instead, he chose to stabilize the borders and fix the root cause of all those civil wars. He fundamentally changed the military with 3 brilliant steps. He created a professional standing force, established fixed 20-year enlistments, and guaranteed a state-funded retirement. Why does this matter? Because by doing this, Augustus ensured that a soldier's loyalty flowed upward directly to the state rather than sideways to some rogue general who was just handing out battle loot. But even with this newfound stability, disaster struck in 9 AD. 20,000. That's how many elite professional Roman soldiers were entirely wiped out in the Teutoburg forest. They were ambushed by a former ally named Arminius. Since Arminius had trained with the Romans, he knew exactly how to use the dense, muddy terrain to completely break their disciplined formations. This absolute slaughter permanently ended Rome's expansion into Germania. They were forced to lock down their borders for good. And this dynamic perfectly illustrates something really fascinating. The so-called barbarians didn't initially want to destroy Rome at all. They actually wanted access to it. Inside the empire, you had paved roads, aqueducts, written laws, and a system that absorbed shocks like famine, pretty much what we expect from a modern nation-state today. Outside, it was decentralized. It lacked those systemic protections. People literally just wanted in on the safety and wealth of the Roman machine. Which brings us to our final act, Part 5, the long, chaotic collapse, who controls the army. As we hit the final phase of Rome, the through line of power shifts dramatically. It moves away from institutions like the Senate and lands squarely in the hands of whoever is physically closest to the emperor. Just look at the Praetorian Guard. Originally, they were just an elite protective unit created by Augustus, but over time, they morphed into absolute kingmakers. Once emperors like Tiberius started isolating themselves or Nero started neglecting his duties, the Guard realized they could simply murder bad rulers and install their own guys. At one point, they literally auctioned the throne off to the highest bidder. It was ultimate proof that if you controlled the army, you controlled Rome. Things really fell apart during the 3rd century crisis. The empire nearly fractured completely under the crushing weight of pandemics, hyperinflation, and constant invasions. Emperors were dying violently left and right. The whole administration was just so incredibly overwhelmed that Emperor Diocletian eventually chopped the empire into a rule of 4 just to survive. This effectively moved the center of power away from the actual city of Rome entirely. The final collapse in the West was a brutal domino effect. As the fearsome Huns exploded out of the steppes, they pushed massive groups of Goths to seek asylum at the Roman border. But corrupt Roman officials mistreated and starved these refugees. That sparked massive revolts that slowly bled the Western Empire dry. Rome was shockingly sacked by the Visigoths in 410 AD, until finally, the very last emperor, ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was quietly asked to step down in 476 AD by his own Germanic military commander. A quiet whimper for such a massive empire. But here's the thing. Considering the Eastern Roman half, the Byzantine Empire, survived for another 1,000 years in Constantinople, what should we actually take away from this explainer regarding the true definition of a civilization's collapse? Did Rome actually fall, or did its center of gravity merely shift eastward, evolving into something completely new? It's a massive, fascinating question to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore the epic rise and the deeply complex fall of the Roman